Welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with Samuel Ekpe of Grupo.io. And today we're going to talk about the very dynamic and changing environment that we find ourselves in right now and what that means for the future of work. Samuel, thank you again for joining the podcast.
Hi, Eric. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Excellent. So we've seen a lot of changes in the environment lately. So not only are we seeing a lot of financial stress because of declines in valuation, but we're seeing a lot of layoffs occurring as well. I mean, the big names obviously are Better.com. They've laid off 3,000 people, but we're seeing a lot more as well. I think you and I were talking earlier, and Netflix just laid off 150 people. What do you think about this changing environment and how that's going to impact the future of work?
I think that it's getting very interesting. All right. Of course, there's inflation, and now everyone is being cautious with spend, and because of that, the later stage companies they kind of cut spend. Right, stocks are down, and as stocks are going down, employees and investors are worried about that. And we're seeing a lot of people pay attention to investors being worried, but also not paying attention to the fact that employees who hold stocks in these public companies are worried too. And because of that, the later stage investors are like, now we are assessing the valuations they have for their previous and current investments. And because of LPs are pulling out a little bit or holding off, and now the VC money is being deployed in a more disciplined way. And so we're having growth stage and later stage companies struggle to fundraise, readjust their valuation, and some are laying off, right, to face the current market realities. And now even the public companies, Netflix and some of these Better.com and some of these companies out there are beginning to also lay off, be able to at least to be able to readjust given the turbulent time. But I think it's very interesting for the future of work. If you go to Blind, you're seeing people complain about the stock percentage they have. I think their stock is down. Their stock is down up to 70%, but in total comp is just down about 30% because they have this cash compensation too. Mm-hmm. So I think the future of work, so many of them are beginning to consider, okay, how can we? This is not as secure as we thought it was. And mm-hmm. So, for example, we are seeing Microsoft trying to find new ways to incentivize people. Apple that was saying everyone should be on site, now they're saying instead of 3 days a week to come 2 days a week. So we're seeing renegotiation in the expectation, understanding that employees are already disgruntled, that their value, the value they hold now is down. And so I think that we're going to see people start taking on part-time work to augment for their full-time engagement. And so that's what I think the future of work is going to be.
It's interesting what you bring up because you're talking about growth and public companies and seeing their valuations drop. Are you also seeing that with the early stage, or do you think the early stage startups are going to be able to maybe exploit some benefit out of this? You mentioned part-time work. It'd be interesting to hear your perspective on that.
So historically, whenever there's layoffs like these, early stage companies quickly try to see if they can capture some talent, but it's a massive problem. It's a delta between what the talent expects and what the early stage startup founder want to pay. And so most early stage startup founders want to pay around 10K for full-time employment. These people, if people that got laid off from Netflix or whatever, they're earning 15 to 20K. And so founders can't afford that. And those people don't want to reduce their lifestyle because of this job. So they're not desperate. Other than what, contrary to popular opinion, these people are not hungry. And in fact, when they're laid off is when they get more requests from companies to hire them. So in fact, they get more interviews lined up. And so the war for talent gets fierce when there's layoff, not the other way around. Because now this is gold rush, this rush for talent. And so they even try to bargain. And so I think that startups are going to face the early stage startup founders. Initially, they will see it as opportunity, but they will come to face reality that they can't afford these people, and they start finding ways to negotiate. What can they do part-time? How can they work with them? Find new ways of engagement. And I think that's going to be exciting to watch. And I think we're in the right place at the right time.
It's interesting that you're bringing up, engineers get a gold rush in terms of job offers after laid off, if it's engineers or anyone in top talent from these growth or early stage. What makes you think that in this era, these individuals will be more open to part-time work than in previous, let's say, recessionary or deflationary times?
The last recession was 2008. After that, top talk came. Before that, that was 2000. After that, upward came. And so there's always going to be a new marketplace, generation marketplace that's coming whenever there's inflation and whenever there's recession. Let me use that word, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that now it's not just inflation or recession. There's also this struggle. Before now, there was always great resignation. So this is recession, inflation meeting great resignation. So it's going to be explosion, right? And so they were always saying they wanted to work on their own terms. Companies were trying to negotiate. Now the pressure is there given the financial situation, and then recession coming. And so I think that now they're just going to realize that, you know what, there's benefit working. So they're going to be using big tech as a benefit as a service company. So they benefit all the perks, the food, they can go to office, enjoy this food. I know people that drive to big tech just to have lunch and come back. Yes, yeah. So they're going to say, okay, I'll keep this for my lunch and safety net, but I'm going to explore opportunities that help me with significant financial upside.
It's interesting what you bring up, because in some respects, the great resignation was driven by, hey, I don't want to be tied to a company, or the company doesn't have loyalty to me, right? Other than my paycheck and the benefits and the long hours. And I think a lot of people were rebelling against those long hours. But what you're suggesting is that, the big tech companies will be, as you point out, benefit as a service, right? But I'm going to have a side hustle. So you're actually thinking that the side hustle will grow in this time period, more or less, because of all the factors that are contributing.
Yeah, everyone has always had side hustle. So when there's a boom, they use the side hustle like some research, R&D, fun hustle. But when it's beer, they look for side hustle that really adds to improving their financial situation. Remember, the salary in big tech has not increased, but knowing that inflation is already at 8%, and financial situation is tough, right? Yes, Microsoft is trying to figure out how to make it benefit-based comp and change some things, but the reality is their salary is remaining the same, stocks is down, and so the total comp that they think they had is even less, and inflation is up. So this is crazy. And so I would think that the people's compensation is truly down by 40 to 50%. And so now they're going to find ways to ensure that whatever they're doing outside work is adding financial benefit to the company, to themselves. Remember, most of them have kids, they're married, they have mortgage, they have all this going on. And so I think that we're about to see a consumer crisis happen, right? And the only way is to augment it, finding other areas of income. Britain yesterday, some of their ministers were saying people should get 2 jobs, 3 jobs if they have to find ways to survive. So I think that this is going to get exciting to observe.
Interesting. So, but what you just described, someone, having to deal with inflationary pressures, but, their salary hasn't necessarily kept up with inflation. They're going to have to work 2 or 3 jobs. You don't necessarily see the power swinging back to the corporations then, or big tech, or even startups.
I think the play that happened even today and yesterday, initially we thought that the power is going to swing to big tech, where they say, you know what, because of financial pressure, come to the office. But we're beginning to see other big tech like Microsoft play a different game and say, you know what, we're going to even try to, give you more comp, right? So it's a war for talent. If someone has to be, to play differently, and whoever plays differently first is where the talent is going to navigate to. So no one wants to be the guy that says, hey, we are forcing you to do X, because people are going to resign, go to the other big tech. And so they're trying to sort of balance between what they want and how they can retain this talent.
So from what you're describing, then you don't see the current inflationary / potential recession as being like a long term. So it's not like going to be like the stagflation economy of Japan during in the previous decade. You're thinking this is going to be a minor or normal, let's call it economic blip during as part of the normal economic cycle?
No, I actually think it's going to be up to 5 years. I
Oh,
think
really?
it's going to be crazier than we think. Remember, we are also dealing with COVID, right? We're also dealing with a war going on somewhere, and we're also dealing with, this Cold War is having some allies, some not allies. It's different. It's different from other situations. And if you follow the previous commentaries and observe what's going on, you realize that previous recessions or previous great recession that have happened in the 30s, it took like 2 3 years, but we can't project the same because we are dealing with a pandemic health, you see, like a health crisis, meeting war, and also meeting financial crisis. These are three crises going on at the same time. Plus this cultural crisis, right? Cultural crisis where people are demanding what they want, and we're also in a state where the country is not it's still polarized. So we have to be able to navigate all this. So I think it's going to take 4 to 5 years. Things are going to get worse before they get better.
Interesting. So, in your startup is specifically focused on the future of work. So do you think that individuals are going to start thinking or already have started thinking differently about work? We've kind of talked through benefit as a service for big tech and then everyone doing a side hustle, but do you see more things happening with the future work and the individual mindset?
I think it's getting interesting because what's happening is not just that people are looking for side hustle, but people are looking to become entrepreneurs. I think for them, they're looking to own their destiny, all right? But it's very risky just living. And so some of them augment it with, just having their full-time job, finding something to work on the side. But ultimately, what they're saying, me, I like to dig down to say, what are they saying that they're not saying? All right. What they're saying is not that we want side hustles, like we want to control our destiny. All right. We want financial breakthrough, financial not just independence that we think we have today. And the fact that the economy are proven like this is a bubble that's happening and that nothing is really secure per se, right? Job security is not guaranteed. So for them, they would rather, some of them that were already trying to be entrepreneurs who rather can go full entrepreneurial route. Those who have been considering it can start doing something on the side and finding ways to, build something, right? Or join something or do something on the side. So I think that other than, I've lived through some minor recession when I was in Nigeria. I've seen the time where people now, become more resilient to even think of building or finding their own side job or doing their own stuff. So people are going to tip towards that way to say, this opportunity for me to augment, to make more, take care of my family, take on more responsibility. Uber came in during that time. Airbnb came in during 2008 recession. People are going to start finding new ways to create financial sustainability plans for their families.
Do you think that it's interesting you bring that up, and 100% agree with you? Like 2008 was an explosion in terms of on-demand economy, right? Airbnb, Uber, to the examples you provided. Some of the segment, there's the whole FIRE principle, right? Was it financial independence, retire early? Do you think that people will think less about retirement and more about pursuing maybe careers, and I'll use that in quotation marks, that fit their passions at that time? It could be maybe they're going to pursue art and maybe make a decent income and live off their savings, etc. And move away from the side hustles, but actually towards, hey, what gives me financial independence, but also allows me to enjoy a moment of happiness with my friends and family?
I think this is an interesting question you asked, but I think that we sort of past that now. That's what happened during the pandemic. That's what people were trying to live for the moment. So I think we have moved past that generation where I want to live for the moment, have all the fun I can, enjoy what I can, take care of, do my passion. And people are not looking for passion right now. I think it's going to be something a little bit different. All right. I think passion projects yet. NFTs and all those stuff have proven that passion projects they're not sustainable at scale. And so this is, I want us to say that 2008 was a financial crisis, all right? And so finance and housing, two crises, financial crisis and housing crisis. Financial crisis, we needed new financial innovation for mobility. So they needed financial mobility at scale. Uber solved that. Then the housing crisis, they needed new ways to create housing supply at scale. Airbnb solved that. And so we need to look at the crisis and see what the solution is. This crisis is another tech bubble, right? This is an innovation crisis, right? So we need new solution that will create innovation at scale. So it's going to be a new platform that allows people to innovate in new ways that create sustainable financial upside and innovation, creativity, and that get new type of VC funding, not the play we're doing the last 1 year, all right? And so that's what I'm saying happened.
Interesting. That's a very interesting viewpoint. I think, you kind of mentioned the current conflict in Ukraine, and then we also have potentially Cold War brewing, right? Again, East versus West. Do you think that those two situations are going to help improve what lies ahead for the future work, or disprove it? And what I mean by that is I think the previous era, to your point, was about globalization, right? So it was very much about, hey, I want to go to the lowest cost country possible and get my economies of scale. Now it seems like, you know what, the lowest cost possible isn't in my best interest, right? There's other factors that we have to take into account. So, I mean, yes, there's that discussion at the macroeconomic, at the big tech level, but what about for individuals like you and me, who might be either at startups or pursuing our financial independence? How would that impact us from that perspective?
Interesting. This is a very interesting question. I think that during the pandemic, we saw, at least during the lockdown pandemic nature, we saw people going to low-cost countries, low-cost cities to live. But something is happening right now. I don't know if you've observed, Silicon Valley is popping up again. So people that went to Miami, New York, Texas are coming back. So I told you it's an innovation crisis. In innovation crisis, this is like war zone. And this is how we create innovative products. So they come back to the center of where the war is fought for innovation. So people are going to centralize back at Silicon Valley, start building. And before now, people used to outsource to Ukraine, outsource to some part of Europe. I think people are going to start looking at what do they have in their local society, local environment. As people struggle with time zone difference, trying to work with people, there's almost a lot of stress already. The last stress I want to think of is working somewhere in another time zone that's totally different, right? And so I've spoken to many founders who don't want to work with someone in Singapore, or like working with somebody in India is another almost 11 to 12 hours. It's stress, and so people want to access people instantly, and accessibility is not just connecting with someone, but connecting with someone in a context that is relevant to the work that they want to do. And so, yeah, even moving to places, I think people are just going to move to where enables them have the resources they need to innovate.
You bring up an interesting point, because do you think that the current climate is going to enable regional players or regional innovators? And let me explain. So obviously, you're going to have a few, let's say, dominant global players. Let's say, use Microsoft as an example, right? But to your point, because people don't want to necessarily deal with the different time zones, or may have to address regional regulatory, constraints, do you foresee that we're going to see more and more regional players and less global players in the future of work?
Yeah, the future of work is sort of the infrastructure for the future of innovation, all right? Because it's where innovators are going to be playing on. And we are increasingly seeing that Silicon Valley playbook is replicated everywhere. People understand how to fundraise, People know how to incorporate in Delaware. Technically, most companies are still US companies, even though they are incorporated in Delaware, but they understand how to run. They're run by entrepreneurs who understand local context. So innovation is now becoming evenly distributed, right? Because of future of work, allow people anywhere to say, no, I can build something in my local context too and solve for my environment. We're going to be seeing entrepreneurs solving for the environment, some other people building for the world, some other people focusing on the environment and trying to acquire other people. The fastest to grow, acquire other people in other local contexts. So that's, I see it like this is innovation economy that is happening, that is spreading across the world, becoming more global. So instead of product becoming global, is the innovation philosophy that is becoming global.
Interesting, and that's harder to contain over borders. So speaking of borders, do you think that, you've kind of touched on the subject. A lot of people moved away from Silicon Valley during the pandemic. They moved to Miami, moved to New York. A lot of people are coming back. Some of it because big tech has mandated it, others because they didn't find let's call it the right fit, right? But we also still on a global level are still seeing a lot of restrictions, right? Because of the pandemic and other immigration reasons. Do you think that will slow down innovation, particularly cross-border innovation, or is that not relevant anymore? Because to your point, the future of work is about not only regionalization, but the platforms that allow you to innovate in different ways, regardless of borders or resource. Well, you might need resources, but you can find those resources.
So this argument has always been around distributed work versus on-site versus remote, and I see it differently. I see it like a scale of collaboration index. So how much can you collaborate when you're on-site? You can, of course, that scale is almost 9 or 10 over 10. Then the question is how much can you collaborate if you're fully distributed? Given the factors and constraints, is somewhere around 3 or 4 or 5. The experience is still not amazing, right? And so people with drive and passion are going to use the resources, the employees wherever they can find them, and figure out how to innovate. But the fact that people congregate in one city, in San Francisco, in some of these hubs that we're seeing, is also going to spark. Just imagine the conversations we have at midnight. It's always tech. During the day, it's always, one new app or something. It's always the conversations in the local cities where these innovators congregate is also what stimulates more creativity and more innovations, more conversations. Say it like the rate of iteration is faster when you also have a physical hub, right? So if it's only digital, it's only remote or only distributed, the rate of rapid iteration that happens, which is really the real innovation, because the number of conversations per square meter you're having, that helps you innovate, right? So when I'm in the Bay, I have more meaningful and more impactful conversation, followed by a network that introductions. Oh, I know this person, go talk to him, that are experts in this field, and make it faster for you to iterate on and invalidate some of your assumptions. Whereas you could be fully distributed, fully remote, and it's so hard for you to connect and meet people that. So the time taken to validate or invalidate is almost 3 times longer. So I think that innovation is faster when you contribute. You sort of have a hybrid experience.
It's interesting you bring that up, because it seems like the limiting factor is the human itself, right? To your point, the concepts, right, whether it's fundraising, operations, or even like using software development kits or SDKs, that's not a limiting factor. It's about how can I iterate and talk to the right people or the right subject matter experts to scale efficiently, which is the reason that we have hubs globally, right? So, and it's an interesting viewpoint you bring up. Going back to the future work, and we kind of briefly touched upon it, right? A lot of the geopolitical conflicts that we're talking about are government driven, right? It is up to governments to set policy, etc. One of the things that we haven't addressed, and why big tech is potentially, hesitant to like fully adopt remote, it could be cultural, but is regulatory, right? It's like if I have employees working in certain states in the US, but I do not have a registered presence there, that may open
Mm.
me up to uh, um, insurance liability or payroll tax liability, etc. Right? Do you think that is a major issue that governments need to address in order to accelerate us towards the next iteration of the future of work? Or is it something that we can get around because, to your point, we'll find a way around it through innovation, and we're entering that cycle now?
Yeah, US is very interesting. Everything here is really localized, and very because of that, the hyper locality is becoming fragmented. So we see the way the system is localized, this, and then there's this federation, but there's a lot of localization happening. So I think we need to move payroll and some of those policies to the federal level and remove it from the state level. That way, if I register my business in one state, I should be able to plug and play. It should be a plug and play experience, all right? In many countries, like for example, if in Nigeria, for example, if I register in Lagos, I can operate in literally Abuja, which is like almost 5 miles away from Lagos. So I think that the US needs to understand that it's just sort of like you have one president. You didn't need to have presidents in every state, right? And so we need to federalize some of our work laws, right? And also enable. I know there are different complications relating to tax, but the reality is it possible for how can we make it possible for companies to register one place and run everywhere? It's like a software challenge where you can write one place and run everywhere. So we need to now build frameworks and infrastructure that allow companies to incorporate one place and employ across the US, right? And then now you can now start figuring out how do you bring those local tax implementation to wherever they move to, right? And in fact, I'm even why are we taxing differently, right? If as long as the same organization, wherever the HQ is, you can apply that HQ tax across board. So I think that this is a lot of innovation that we used to innovate in the US. We're not becoming more, careful with innovating. I think this is going to force us. It's time to get back to building. It's time to get crazy again and say, you know what, we're going to change things that need to be changed. If Amazon is in Seattle, their HQ is there, if they incorporate there, they should be able to open office anywhere. And we can apply the state taxes if you want, and we can apply the federal tax and say, okay, which one are the federal employees? And we can even do that. Who are the federal employees? Who are the state employees? Right? And so there must be ways we need to use to get around all this. And of course, there are also startups like Deal. There are also startups like Deal, Gusto, and some of Rippling and some of these companies trying to figure out how to help people who are hiring across states to be able to figure out those compliance in each state. I think there's so much they can do. I don't think big enterprises are going to want to adopt them overnight, right? So I think that's another problem.
I think you have a very interesting viewpoint, which is, you respect the individualism, which drives a lot of innovation, but we need to simplify the systems. And that's something we haven't necessarily done recently. We've kind of done a patchwork concerning that. In some respects, that's counter to what we're seeing right now, which is greater and greater decentralization, right? The rise of Web3, the rise of crypto. Do you think that, again, looking at an individual contributor, right? Using Grupa as an example, you're taking passionate individuals who, let's not call it side hustle, to your point, right? Like they're interested in building something for the future, right? Whether they're friends and family, etc. Do you think that model applies to the rest of the population? And what I mean by that is, the individuals that work in Silicon Valley, we're very type AAA, as I like to call it, right? We may appear laid back and like surfer dude and all that, but we want to build stuff. And I love your concept of like builders. But there's a lot of people that aren't necessarily builders. They want the paycheck, but they want to spend more time with friends and family. Environment, that is going to be sustainable in terms of like, hey, if you're not a builder, you're going to have a decent job? Or do you have to be a builder in this new future of work?
In this new future of work, there's going to be innovators, going to be builders, and there are going to be those who are workers, right? It's going to be divided into three, right? And so what Groupa is doing at scale is finding innovators, connecting them with the builders who are like teams, experts, or other folks, and then empowering them to unlock and create new generation companies. Those companies then employ the workers, all right? Because that's how we create jobs in America. It's not like we need to find ways to create new companies. But to create new companies, you need great teams, and to find great teams follow great vision. So we find those visionaries who are the innovators, founders, co-founders, and find ways to connect them to the smartest people on the planet, and then get them to create the next generation companies. If we do that, if we create even 100 companies and that employs 20, 50 each, we're reducing the unemployment rate. And imagine if we can build the next Stripes, the next DoorDash, right? Do you know that there are people living on DoorDash full-time? It's like their full-time employment. DoorDash has created direct and indirect jobs, right, at scale, faster than any local government can, all right? And so we need to start thinking about how new generation creating economies, I call them economies because these are not just companies, they're creating new economies. These economies can then employ new kind of workers who get elevated with their knowledge of work, knowledge of systems. So for example, if you talk to Uber drivers, they feel a little bit more innovative as even drivers than the taxi folks. They feel like they understand technology, they're living the technology economy. And so we think we can accelerate towards civilization or transition into a better civilized future by enabling new creation of next generation companies, empowering all these early stage companies.
Very interesting. I think this has been a great conversation. So, on my podcast, I always leave the last word to our guests. So any final words to maybe our listeners or people who, are thinking about how to navigate this new future of work, particularly during this turbulent, let's say, startup environment time?
I think, it's very risky out there. There's no safety. The best time to start something, join something, find a friend that's doing something exciting, or follow your guts is now, right? Of course, you can do it in a more responsible way. You don't have to give up your job yet. Find people who are building something, find people who are creating something, or find ideas you're passionate about and explore, right? Because that's how we move civilization one step forward, right? That's how we change the world. So let's go and change the world.
I love that hopeful note, Samuel, and I think it's very relevant. I think we each have that power to change the world, and it just starts with a small step, and it becomes a giant leap for mankind.
Yeah, amazing.
All right, thank you, Samuel.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure.